This is a Renegade Media Network podcast.
Let me tell you guys about a sponsor of this show, and that is Zippix Toothpicks. They are wonderful flavored toothpicks that have nicotine in each one. You can find them at zippixtoothpicks.com. A lot of you are probably trying to kick a bad habit here in the new year. These are a great alternative to that habit. And come on, let's face it. They're sponsoring this show, so you know that's a good thing. But I'm telling you, they're the cheapest alternative on the market. They've got flavors. Let me tell you, right here, I've got my packet. Zippix Toothpicks, Spearmint Spice. I love this flavor. They've got whiskey flavor. They've got clove flavor. They want to sponsor shows like mine, so that should make you want to give them some business. They've got a promo code, a new one with the Counterflow podcast. The promo code is BUCK, B-U-C-K, of course. So go to Zippix Toothpicks. That promo code, BUCK, will get you 10% off of your order. Once again, zippixtoothpicks.com, promo code BUCK for 10% off your order. They're delicious. They got just the right amount of nicotine in them, and you will enjoy them. Kick that nasty habit, and let's get to the show.
You are now listening to the Counterflow podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, but I call the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
Hey, what is up, you guys? Welcome back once again to Counterflow. Once again, we are back, and I'm super stoked to have my guest on today. I needed this conversation. I really did because, I just needed it. Let's put it that way. I've got Matthew Erickson back on the show. He was last with us, I think, back when it was the old show called Death to Tyrants. But so this technically, I suppose, could be his first appearance on the Counterflow podcast. And if you don't know Matt, you really should. His thinking and his ideas and the way he puts these ideas, the way he articulates them, it will make you think. I can promise you that. And I do think that it's going to get some pushback, I suppose. I don't do these episodes to get pushback, but it is interesting. I like discourse on things. And Matt is certainly not average, generic, milquetoast, or certainly not afraid to say what he's thinking. And he's got a lot of ideas on libertarianism, structures of power, Machiavellianism. I think if you know that term, you already understand it. If you don't know that term, you'll get what we're talking about by the end of this conversation. You'll see he's a fan of Mencius Moldbug, aka Curtis Yarvin, as I know some of you guys are as well. And we're going to talk about a lot of themes that fit within the words I just said, basically. You know, there's a lot of libertarians out there that want to get the word out to everyone. And I think if we just convince enough people to leave everyone alone, boom, we've got a libertarian society. Is that really how it works? Is that how the structures of political power work in this country? So we're going to have a discussion all about that. And I will tell you quickly, for those of you who don't know Matt Erickson, you have got to go, if you watch YouTube, if you listen to YouTube, however that works for you, go to YouTube, find Kingpilled, the Kingpilled Videocast. That's what he's doing right now with Stephen Messina. And soon it's going to be a podcast. I can't wait for that because typically that is how I take in content. But I like Matt's show so much that I do watch everyone that he puts out. And of course, you might know him from the Wealth, Power, and Influence show with Jason Stapleton. He is Jason's co-host on there. And it's just, this guy is great to talk to. And he makes me think. I told, when I started first talking to my friend Thaddeus Russell, that was one of the things I told him. People like you're one of those ones that make me think. And there are a handful of them out there in our circles, we can say, and Matt is definitely one of them. So without further ado, let's jump into this conversation with my friend, Matt Erickson. Welcome to Counterflow, sir. How are you?
Good, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing great. You've been on before, and I know a lot of people will know you from
the co-host of Wealth, Power, and Influence with Jason Stapleton. But what I also want them to know you for is the stuff I can't quit listening to the show that you have with Stephen Messina. What do you call it? I listen to every episode, and I guess, could we call it Kingpilled?
Yeah.
Go ahead, and I want you to tell the people listening that aren't familiar with that aspect of what you do all about it.
So Kingpilled is basically we're attempting to make it into a podcast right now. It's just a YouTube channel, just because between having a newborn and being the co-host of another show and then working as well, I'm dragging my feet, taking the time to get the actual technical details done to actually legitimately release it as a podcast. So for now, you can go to YouTube, just look up Kingpilled, all one word. And pilled as in red pilled, blue pilled, black pilled, white pilled, just Kingpilled. It's a new take on it. And it pretty much has just been kind of a platform for me to loose all the ramblings in my mind. I sit and think about these things constantly. My whole hobby is just sitting and thinking about and reading and pondering and listening to people talking about philosophy and religion and politics and psychology and anything across that goes into any of those categories. So I have lots of things to say, and I kind of wore out the ear of all the people around me. And so I just kind of stopped talking to people and just talked to myself. And then I met this guy, Stephen Messina, and he was like, we started having a conversation and chatting back and forth. And I introduced him to this guy, Mencius Moldbug, and gave him a series of videos to go watch from a guy's channel called Anamnesis. And I'll give a shout out to Anamnesis. Go check him out. His channel is phenomenal. It's like analysis of Moldbug. It's spelled Anamnesis. And he's shouted out our show as well. He's a fan, which was really cool when that happened. I was pretty starstruck. But anyway, so Stephen was like, you guys, you have to start talking about this stuff. You have to be probably talking about this stuff publicly. People need to hear what you have to say. And I was like, all right, well, yeah, I know. I want to start a podcast. I've been telling people that I think I'm going to start a podcast, but I just didn't start one. And so he just harassed me enough until he got me to sit down and record an episode on YouTube. And we uploaded it. It was Why This Libertarian is Voting for Trump. And it was a provocative title, deliberately so. And we had a take on it because he agreed with me, and he likes to be humble, but he's got a brilliant mind in his own right. And he has some really, really insightful takes himself. So we work really well on the show together, but our take was unique, one that we weren't hearing from really anybody else. And that's what we found a lot with our show, is that we tend to be talking about stuff that's on the margins of what everyone else is talking about. But we have a pretty unique take on politics and on religion. For example, I consider them the same thing. Politics and religion are effectively the same dynamic with just two applications. And they're always they're inextricable from one another. In politics, you always wind up with religions, and in religion, you always wind up with politics. And there's reasons for that, and I can explain all that. But so I guess what we would call ourselves is like post-libertarians, kind of. And so that's what the subject of Kingpilled is basically just kind of our ramblings and rantings on our frustrations with libertarians. And I still haven't figured out a good word for this. I don't know whether to call it the liberty movement or liberty. I hate liberty lovers, but libertarians, conservatives, constitutional conservatives, basically anybody who holds liberty as a value or talks about limited government. Those are the types of people that listen to our show, and they're the ones we're trying to talk to.
Yeah. So, and you have both lived through that period of life where that was your main philosophy, and you say post-libertarianism now. We'll get into the weeds on that, but is this basically, can we say there's been a pipeline for maybe you guys from liberty lovers, libertarianism, to neo-reactionary philosophy?
Yeah, I would be hesitant to call myself a neo-reactionary, just because I've gotten to the point where I'm hesitant to identify myself with any ideology, just because I don't know where I'm going to be in a couple of years. Mm-hmm. I started out more or less kind of Bush neoconservative kind of when I was younger, and then as I was going through college, I dabbled in Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And then I encountered libertarianism, but I was like, oh, I'm more of a, anarchy just seems unrealistic to me. I just don't see it ever happening. And I'm more of a I'd be a minarchist, or maybe like a constitutional conservative. And then, more time went by, and eventually I was like, no, I'm an anarchist. Like I'm full blown ANCAP. And now time keeps going by, and it's like I feel like that same trend has continued. Like I'm getting more and more libertarian. I don't feel like I've stopped and gone a different direction. I'm just continuing in this trend. But I feel like most people who call themselves libertarians got off the bus too early, and they didn't take the ideology to its logical conclusions. They didn't take it from abstraction to application. And so I feel like I'm the one carrying the so-called liberty movement forward, while other people have just kind of stopped and they've sort of fallen off by the wayside, and they haven't continued. Like the phrase I used with you yesterday when we were talking was updating your political operating system.
Yeah.
And it feels like a lot of people, especially a lot of prominent vocal libertarians, they've very clearly stopped reading.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they got to a certain point and they thought, okay, I've made it. I've figured out, I've got the answers to everything now. Now it's just a matter of, since I've solved all the world's problems, now it's just a matter of trying to convince everybody else that I've solved all the world's problems.
Yeah.
And if they would just listen to me and do things my way, then we could solve everyone's problems. And this really misses out on some really key insights on human nature and the way that human beings organize themselves, the way that human beings learn, the way human beings exchange knowledge and information, the way that human beings naturally arrange themselves and develop a society, like the baseline layer of civilization. The whole libertarian worldview, and by libertarian I mean what you would generally consider libertarian, is all completely divorced from actual application. Mm-hmm. So what I like to say is that libertarians have identified the ends, but they don't know them. We need to discover the means for getting to those ends. Libertarianism is an end, it's not a means. If you act like a libertarian, you won't bring about libertarianism. Yeah. So I think that I think at this point that what's generally called libertarianism is as utopian as socialism. Mm-hmm. It's not. It's something that works for a fictional reality, but to actually bring it into this reality requires a totally different approach.
Requires some violations of the non-aggression principle, I suppose.
Right. Yeah, you have to violate the nap to save the nap.
Yes. Yeah. I was having a conversation with Thaddeus Russell offline a few weeks ago, and we were talking about the incredible homeless problem in Austin. And I have since moved away from Austin to get out of that craziness. And he said, I got to ask you, Buck, what's the ANCAP solution? What's the free market solution? And I said, I'm starting to think we're going to have to violate some ANCAP principles to fix some things like that. And so I think that might be what you're getting at as well. I want to ask you, one of the main themes I've taken from your show is that you put a lot of emphasis on what we'll call the Machiavellian theory or strategy or understanding of politics. And I'd like you to talk about what that is and why that explains so much as far as political power and political structures go.
So Machiavellianism has a pretty bad rap. It's generally taken as having a negative connotation. Even if you go search YouTube right now for Machiavellian, what you're going to get is a lot of people talking about like narcissistic personality disorder, and that it's seen as very dark. And I think there's a good reason for that. I think that's fair. A lot of people who operate according to Machiavellian principles or the lack thereof, because Machiavellianism is really the denunciation of principle in the way that you act. You act according to strategy, according to what will win, and not according to what is right. It's very utilitarian in that sense. And so because of that, the people who practice Machiavellianism are overwhelmingly evil, and they do it for evil reasons. But there's a baby with the bathwater sort of dynamic here, where people say, well, because acting in a Machiavellian way is practiced by evil people, then we just won't act that way at all. And the problem with that is that the reason evil people behave in a Machiavellian way is because it works, and because people who practice Machiavellianism tend to win because they engage in a game that they're playing to win, and their opponents are engaging in a game where they have some other purpose. They have some other goal. And the thing with politics is that politics is on a continuum with war. It's democratic politics in particular is a perpetual state of warfare where you have two armies show up and they decide who's going to win the war based on which army is larger, which army brings more people. But you don't stop playing the war. Every so often you have the war again and you see how big is the army now? Okay, what about now? What about now? And people will say, oh, a republic is different than a democracy, but a republic still falls under the broad envelope of democracy. It's a form of democracy because the people who use democracy, the people who practice it, this is a frustration for me with libertarians, that they want to get into this definition game where they're trying to say, oh, well, the actual definition of democracy is this. Mm-hmm. And it's like they're trying to debate with the tank as it's rolling over them. Yeah. And you don't get to define the word. The person with the tanks defines the word because they're the ones who can do something about it. And the way that they practice democracy is it's rule that takes into consideration the will of the people, that at least has the will of the people play a role in the deciding versus just simply assigning stuff, just dictating that stuff is the case and it doesn't matter what people think. Democracy is at least the illusion that the people run the government. So it's this whole mob rule. Yeah, in practice, it winds up being mob rule, whatever. The thing, if you're trying to debate that with someone, the problem is the person you're trying to debate it with believes in mob rule.
Yes.
So you trying to say that, oh, well, this is bad. You guys don't have the same value set. You guys aren't operating the world that they want to live in is completely different than the world you want to live in. And trying to debate with them about it isn't going to get you anywhere because they don't believe in debate. They explicitly do not believe in debate. Now, they know that you believe in debate, so they will happily bait you into it so that then they can just trample you and leave you standing there holding the bag. The nature of the modern left is that it takes the rules appointed by the right and says, here's the rules. Now we know what you will follow, so we know what to break.
Yes.
You'll bind yourself with your rules. We won't. We'll do whatever we want. So what Machiavellianism says is, don't do what you think is right. Do what will work. Do what will be effective. Act according to what will win, rather than some hypothetical ideal that you're trying to abide by. I like to say that in where politics is concerned, principles are just decorations on the tombs of dead men. Your principles not only will not bring you the win in politics, they will actively work against you. Principled people in politics are Ned Stark. That's what it looks like when you practice your principles in politics. Politics just is not a game for principles. Now, what I want people to hear from that is, if you want to live according to principle, get out of politics.
Yeah.
Don't get involved. And by don't get involved, that means don't comment on it. Don't vote. Don't even express an opinion about it. Because if you do, as soon as you do, like people think, oh, well, I don't get involved in politics. I just sit from the sidelines and just write Facebook posts and make like pot shots. Mm-hmm. That means you get involved in politics, because that's what politics is in a democratic society. It has to do with the collective consciousness, the collective unconsciousness of the society. And that's informed by the stuff people put out into the air. So what I'm wanting to do is I'm wanting to rehabilitate the image of Machiavelli, and specifically the Machiavellian thinkers as appointed by James Burnham. This is where I really got into it, was the book, The Machiavellians, Defenders of Freedom by James Burnham, who was a fascinating character. He was a Trotskyite who was in the United States when Trotskyism came to the United States. And he became basically the leading Trotskyite intellectual of his time. And eventually he kind of moved beyond that, but he's the one who coined the term the Managerial Revolution, where he identified that no longer was the world run by the capitalists of old. He was kind of operating Yes, perfect, wonderful book. The managers, what he identified is that managers run the society now. So he was making like a Marxist class analysis, sort of coming from a more or less Marxist background, but he was realizing that we were moving out of the age of the capitalists. The capitalists no longer ran the world. What ran the world was basically bureaucracies, middle managers. I tweeted this the other day. I said that Congress serves the role of middle management in the bureaucracy that is the American corporate state. So what Burnham identified is that the world is now run by managers. There was a managerial revolution, and the world's run by managers. And he didn't say that's good or that's bad. He said that just is the way the world is. And once you realize that, you realize, okay, well, these are the rules of the game. So once I know the rules of the game, now I can decide whether I want to play according to the rules or violate the rules. And it just so happens that the people who constantly win in this sort of system are the people who play according to rules that say always violate the rules in strategic time. So at a strategic point, you'll see this with the left all across the board. And this happens with the right as well. Mitch McConnell is the master of this. You deliberately break the rules of decorum, you break with tradition, right when your opponent expects you to keep with tradition. Right when your opponent expects to play by the rules, you break the rules. You do something that's unexpected and it gets you the upper hand. Because ultimately that's all politics is just striving to get the upper hand. Because all of society runs on power. And if you want to change the world through politics, it requires you getting power. And that's where libertarians fail, is because they don't believe in power. They don't believe in taking power. Explicitly, they don't believe in taking power because they have a principled problem with it. The problem is the rest of the world doesn't operate according to your principles. So you doing it doesn't make your principles more likely to come about. It makes them less likely. Because when you operate according to your principles, you get wiped out. And there's fewer people who your principles get less influence in the culture. So we're not moving in the direction of libertarianism. As more and more people have become libertarians, the world has become less and less libertarian.
Yes.
We're not moving toward libertarianism. And you trying to act like we're on, there's this libertarian impulse to assume that the world is like a blank slate and that each of us gets the opportunity to paint our own picture upon the world. And it's just a matter of trying to convince enough other people to paint the same picture that we want to paint. But we don't live at the beginning of time. We live in the middle of time. We already have a system. We already have a world that exists that has rules that everyone plays by. And so libertarians have no power. They have no influence. They have no voice. And they don't get to dictate the outcome of how things go. The only way that you get to dictate outcomes is by taking power. And so what I advocate is that libertarians begin thinking like a Machiavellian. Read the book, The Machiavellians by James Burnham. He talks about specific Machiavellian thinkers. We could get into them if you want. But that's where I see myself is that every libertarian says that no one else is as good of a libertarian as I am. Well, what I see is that the majority of people who call themselves libertarians don't actually want to live in a libertarian world. They just want to act like they do because it will give them in-group status among the rest of the libertarians. Yes. Everyone, I said this on Wealth, Power, and Influence it was on my own show the other day, I think. I said that everyone would rather be the king of the sandbox than like middle management in the whole playground. So libertarians are playing status games within their own little echo chamber, within their own little ecosystem, while having no impact whatsoever on the outside world. And I think that they can. I think that the libertarian message can have an impact on the outside world. It just has to be preached in a much different way than it currently is.
I want to tell you guys about our newest sponsor. Check this name out. I love it. DomesticTerroristClothing.com. Back in the summer of 1776, the original domestic terrorists gathered in Philadelphia to declare independence from Mother England. Well, you can declare your independence from leftist PC culture by wearing a shirt showing the drafting of that historic document centered between the words, I love this, domestic terrorist. These tees and hoodies are available in a variety of colors that fit like a well-loved favorite. Super soft cotton and an excellent quality print makes you fall in love with it over and over again. And I'll tell you about the guys that started this company, domesticterroristclothing.com. They, like many of us in the liberty movement, they're concerned about, well, half the country being labeled domestic terrorists. This label is being applied to hardworking, average people like, well, you guys and me, basically. Their goal is to reappropriate these words and normalize them to remove the negative connotation. I love that idea. They want to see their brand on people from all walks of life. So when the blue checks label you a domestic terrorist, you could smile and say, why, yes, I am, knowing there are many of millions just like you. You can find them on Facebook, Twitter, Gab, and Minds. So, domesticterroristclothing.com, and of course, you know I'm going to have a promo code for you. Buck, as always, BUCK at checkout gets you 10% discount on all items over at domesticterroristclothing.com. Let's get back to the show.
Do you think that Donald Trump, maybe because of his ruthless business savvy, was Machiavellian, and that from someone, we'll call him from the right, that is part of what freaked the entire left population out, is because, wait a second, this guy does what we do?
Yes, that was exactly what he was. He beat the left at their own game.
Yeah.
He sucked up all the attention in the room, and he made them react to him. There's a reason that, like, so the school of thought that I kind of am most influenced by right now is NRX, or neo-reactionary. Yeah. And so the right is typically the ones associated with reacting. The left sets the terms, the right reacts. Left sets the terms, right reacts. Left sets new terms, right reacts to those. Back and forth, back and forth. This is because of the psychology of the conservative person versus the progressive person. The conservative person is more concerned with tradition and familiarity and hierarchy and stability, and the progressive left-wing person is more interested in possibility and opportunity and new things, and is in opposition to hierarchy, wants to flatten things because the existence of a hierarchy precludes various opportunities. It gets in the way of people. It can be oppressive, etc. So because of that, the left-wing people are the ones that are advancing the agenda. They're the ones that are opening the pushing the envelope, and that are opening up new conversations. And then right-wing people are responding to them, and kind of like, they're like running along behind them, trying to shut doors it's like they're running through a room with a bunch of doors and windows, and they're opening them all, and the right's running around and trying to shut them all behind them. That's kind of the dynamic that happens. Trump inverted that. Mm-hmm. He stopped playing by the rules. He said, fuck your decorum. I'm going to say what I want. Yeah, I'm a playboy. I use locker room talk, whatever. The first thing he said was that the only women he calls fat, disgusting dogs, the only woman he does it to is Rosie O'Donnell. Like, that was the very first thing that he said. He came in like a bull in the china shop and completely upended the chessboard. And that's typically the behavior reserved to the left. The left upends the chessboard while the right tries to keep it there. Trump started upending it. The problem is, he wasn't a libertarian. So libertarians were more interested in preserving the dignity of the system that steps on their throats than they were in actually affecting any sort of change in any positive direction whatsoever. There's nobody who opposes positive change like a libertarian. Libertarians are their own greatest enemies.
I want to talk about, we've kind of hit upon it in this last segment, but left versus right. And I think there's a propensity for a lot of libertarians to say, well, libertarianism is not either one. And it's like, okay, in its fine, narrow sense, I suppose it's not. But I think it's foolish to pretend that we are not one of those things as people, to say, well, I'm neither left nor right. And it's like, well, a lot of us are. And I would define right wing as accepting of, if not in favor of, natural hierarchy in life. And I would define left wing as in favor of, striving for egalitarianism. I'd like to bounce that off you. Is that how you would define those terms? And if not, what would you add to anything to that?
That's exactly how I would define them. I like Michael Malice's. It's a little tongue in cheek, but he says if you want to find out whether someone's left wing or right wing, just ask them the question: are some people better than others? A right wing person will say yes, and a left wing person will give you a speech. Now, that doesn't always hold true, because even ostensibly right wing people in our culture are steeped in left wing thought. The entire Western tradition is itself left wing. The idea of limited government and representative government, even the idea of the value of the individual human soul, all of these things are all have been brought into the world by left-wing thinkers. So our entire political system is itself left-wing on the greater spectrum of political systems. But the left-right dichotomy is much, much deeper than the authoritarian libertarian dichotomy. It's much deeper than conservative or progressive even. The left-right dichotomy is like, everyone knows what it is. Like if you say a left-wing person versus a right-wing person, people know what you're talking about. So this is a phenomenon that exists. It clearly exists. There's this broad bimodal distribution of people, psychologically speaking, their value systems, etc. And you can have authoritarian right or authoritarian left, and you can have libertarian right and libertarian left. These things are they function independently of each other, or I guess not independent of each other, but they're connected to each other, but distributed away from each other. There's people like to talk about how fascism is right wing. Well, yeah, fascism is right wing, but fascism is right wing democracy, which is democracy is left wing. So the fascism to communism distribution exists on a smaller spectrum that is itself placed on a larger spectrum of left versus right. And at its very fundamental basis, right is, as Mencius Moldbug says, right is pronomian. Nomian is from the word nomos, which means law, and it's not just law; it's like tradition or custom or anything like that has it's an aspect of society that is rooted in the past and it's familiar. These are custom, traditions, laws. All these things are all considered pronomian, and the left is antinomian. The left opposes what exists. They focus on what could exist rather than what does exist. And so the way that expresses itself is, as you said, in egalitarianism. They want to oppose hierarchy because they see hierarchy and structure and institutions as oppressive. They prevent people from fully exploring all that could be, because that's the role of an institution, is to constrain people's actions. That's why we create institutions, and we create institutions in turn to protect ourselves. So society is built around, civilization is built around institutions which exist as threat avoidance mechanisms that we've created for ourselves. So the left is in the business of tearing those down. They want to eliminate hierarchies. They want to eliminate borders. They want to eliminate borders between people. They want to eliminate borders between ideas. They don't want to have, you can't have male and female. We have to blur that line. We have to blur those differences, because when you have differences, you have hierarchy. You'll always get hierarchy as soon as you have differences. So that's, I'm starting to ramble here, but that's the basis of the right-left distinction is pro-order versus pro-chaos. And the order chaos is even at the basis of left and right. And this is an idea that's been percolating in my head, that I'm going to talk about this on an episode of our show here in the near future. But I've settled on and been fully persuaded that the right is equivalent with order, which is equivalent with good, and the left is equivalent with chaos, which is equivalent with evil. So right is good, left is evil. I'm going to make the case for that coming up in a future episode, because I've become persuaded of that, and that gets down into religion and areas where we can go deeper into that if you'd like to. But
you said recently on one of your episodes that there's this right-wing energy within this country waiting to be harnessed by someone, and that basically if someone can figure that out, how to harness it, that then they've got quite a future. What would, I want to hear you explain some of that, and what would winning look like for the right in this country?
Oh, that's a good question. So I'll go for the first part of it first, the right-wing energy. What we've had and what we have in the culture right now is, I don't think anybody would really doubt this, that there's a rampaging left-wing sentiment that has become just completely unconstrained. And it's there's an irony here, because all of the existing institutions are all propagating this left-wing message, which seems like there's kind of a paradoxical element here. It seems contradictory, but it actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because if you take a broad left-wing sentiment like this, which says tear things down, flatten the playing field, if you can harness and control that, you can use it as a weapon, because the vast majority of people are not capable of independent thought. I like to say that the best thing about social media is that it gives anyone a voice, and the worst thing about social media is it gives anyone a voice. There's a lot of people whose opinions don't matter, they should not be consulted on matters of import. They need to be told what to do, because the fact of the matter is they are told what to do. They just, in our system where we try to pretend that everyone is equal and that we all get to have an equal say in things, we've deceived ourselves kind of collectively that a lot of these people are somehow distinct from slaves of the past or serfs, that they're somehow evolved in some sense. And that kind of plays into the popular mythology, it's through the government, it's through the state, it's through these powerful institutions that the human soul can be perfected. There's an element of truth to that, but I won't get into that for now. So there's the vast majority of people are rubes. They're NPCs. That's why the NPC meme is so powerful, because these people wait for someone to instruct them on what to believe and how to act. And this type of person will exist in any society. So if there's this idea called circulation of the elites, and I know that I'm really throwing a lot of kind of complex ideas at you here, but if you want to know more about this stuff, just listen to my podcast, because this is the type of stuff we get into. So there's this concept called circulation of the elites, which is one of the Machiavellian thinkers, Wilfredo Pareto, talked about how every human society ultimately organizes itself in the hoi polloi, all the masses, and a small group of elites who govern them. It doesn't matter what sort of social system, what sort of governmental system, what sort of arrangement you have, there will always be a small number of people who govern everyone else. They have disproportionate power. This expresses itself in the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. In every distribution of people, you'll have this 80-20 distribution. You'll also have a 90-10 distribution and a 99-1. And this continues on a fractal scale all the way up to the top. So there's what happens in a society when you have a revolution is one group of the elites mobilizes enough populist sentiment and populist support behind them that they topple a different group of the elites and they take over. But it's, again, just circulations among the elites. So to have a healthy society, what you need to have the possibility of circulation between the elites and the lower classes, where someone who's born a serf, who's born a slave, through some form of meritocracy of some type, manages to get himself into the elite class. The reason you need this is because, number one, it's good for the elites to get fresh blood and get new ideas and new perspectives into their circles. But number two, the plebs, the serfs, the slaves are much more easy to control if they have the belief that they can make it into the upper class. If they have something to strive for, if they have meaning that they can pursue, then they're much easier to manipulate. So this is something that once you start studying marketing, it was working with Jason Stapleton and learning marketing that really opened my eyes to the malleability of people and the way that human beings don't make decisions rationally. They make them emotionally and then justify them using reason. But ultimately they make decisions emotionally, which makes them very easy to program. If you know how to program people, you can do it. And people know how to program other people, and like almost just by the natural course of time, they wind up in the positions of the most power where they're programming people. So because of that, getting back to how there's a popular left-wing sentiment in the country right now that's dominating everything, a segment of the elites have discovered this dynamic. and they are seeding these left-wing revolutionary narratives into the culture because it destabilizes everyone but them. And so by destabilizing everyone else, they can gradually topple all the other potential threats to their own power. Now, a lot of this isn't necessarily, this sounds very much like dark smoky room with like guys with monocles and pipes, and those do exist. There's a dynamic of that, but a lot of this is just kind of an emergent feature of people with coordinating incentives, where it's just a whole bunch of people. It's a big giant networked machine with a bunch of people operating according to their incentives. And through a course of sort of like natural selection, we've wound up in this situation here. So if you read communist thought throughout the 20th century, they explicitly described this phenomenon and prescribed for people who believed like them that in order to achieve the communist utopia, you have to take over the popular culture of the country. You have to start with the institutions, and specifically what they named, Antonio Gramsci, the institutions he named were the family, the church, the media, the education system, and the law. There was a few others, I don't remember what they were, but there was those specifically. He said, these institutions need to be infiltrated and subverted. So for people who try to say, oh, the family doesn't matter, the church doesn't matter, the people who oppose you, the people who hate you and want to destroy everything that's valuable to you, they sure seem to think that they matter because that's where they focus all of their attention. They take over the institutions, they subvert the culture, and the government just follows suit because that's the nature of this whole politics is downstream of culture. Yeah. Politics is not downstream from culture. The government is downstream from culture. Politics is upstream of culture because culture is downstream of politics. Culture is downstream of religion, which is the same thing as politics. That's neither here nor there right now. So to answer your question, there has been a mind virus that has taken over American popular culture and by default global popular culture, because the rest of the world is just vassal states of the American empire, essentially. So there's this mind virus that's deeply irrationally, bizarrely leftist. And it's focused on toppling every single institution it can find in the name of trying to attain utopia. It's an evolved perversion of or degradation of Protestant Christianity, which is kind of the irony of all of this. It's the people, the radical leftists who are invading the society are all so hostile to Christianity, but they don't realize that they're operating within a Christian superstructure. Their entire moral system is all rooted in Christianity. It's rooted in a Christian ethic. They've just appointed a new God they're trying to attach this Christian ethic to a new God, the God of the self, they worship the ego. So this has completely taken over the entire country. And it just so happens that people like institutions. Generally speaking, people want to live in peace and safety. They like civilization. They like their churches. They like their grocery stores. They like, they like having stability in their society. And this rampaging leftism has used the values of liberalism against itself, because liberalism is this idea of being tolerant and just kind of live and let live. So they're like, okay, well, you guys live and let live, and we will live. So you guys take care of the let live part, and we're just going to live. And eventually we're going to take you over and stomp you and destroy all of your institutions, and you're going to let us do it because those are your principles. So that can only go for so long. Eventually people just aren't going to stand for that anymore. And they're going to want a strong man to come in and destroy all of their enemies. This happens all throughout human history. There's countless examples of it. It is as innately human as anything could possibly be. So that right-wing sentiment, this desire for the reasserting, the reassertment of hierarchy and law and order is going to manifest itself in a totalitarian right-wing response. mobilized behind the most powerful leader they can find. There's a vacuum for that right now, and nature abhors a vacuum. It will fill it. Whoever effectively fills that is going to make Trump look like a kindergarten teacher and is going to have the most power of any human being in history. And I would like to have at least some sort of a say in who that might be.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And I, some of my listeners are going to be familiar with Mencius Moldbug, known as Curtis Yarvin. And we've mentioned him a few times. You're definitely influenced by his writings, and you've turned me on to his writings. We started, you said, just start with Mises, from Mises to Carlyle, and I did. His movement is known as NRX, neo-reactionary, the Dark Enlightenment. Can you give my listeners who have maybe just heard his name or maybe heard a few of these ideas, what's kind of a basic beginner's understanding of what that is all about?
So Moldbug is a monarchist. He is an advocate of monarchy. And this is the sort of thing that really kind of freaks libertarians, and speaking libertarians broadly, constitutional conservatives, the whole like liberty movement, they tend to freak out when they hear about monarchy, because in their mind, monarchy is the polar opposite of freedom. They see all this power invested in a single person as the furthest thing from freedom. Now, one thing that's kind of ironic is that our existing system, despite being sort of monarchical and moving in a monarchical direction, which there's a reason for that, it's because monarchy is about as innately human as anything else. But leaving that aside, this impulse, I just kind of lost my train of thought. Yarvin and NRX and monarchy. Yeah. And okay, I remember where I was.
Yep.
So it's ironic that people see monarchy as so far from freedom, because the only thing separating monarchy from anarchy is a single bullet. When you have a monarch, he has absolute power, which is to say he has absolute responsibility. He has absolute accountability. If things are shitty, everyone knows who to blame. And for that reason, he has strong incentive to keep his subjects happy and pacified. Now, because we've been steeped in leftist dogma for our entire existence, because leftism has been pervading Christianity for centuries, because we come at this from a leftist perspective, when we hear monarchy, we think, antithesis of liberty.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, this is a formulation of this idea that has just kind of occurred to me recently, and it's provocative, so I like it. Libertarianism demands authoritarianism. In order to have a libertarian society, you must have absolute enforcement of the law. There must be absolute enforcement of property rights. In the mind of a libertarian who asserts the nap and claims to oppose violations of property rights should be just as appalled by a pickpocket as they are by a brutal dictator. Now, obviously, these things are different in scale, but they're not different in substance. Both of them are violations of property rights. But for whatever reason, again, this is leftism. As there's the joke about the one fish who swam up to the other fish and said, "Oh wow, the water's warm today, isn't it?" And the other fish said, "What's water?"
Yeah,
that's us with respect to leftism. We are percolating in it, so we don't realize that we're approaching this from a left-wing perspective. But in order to have a libertarian society where everything is peace and harmonious, you must have absolute enforcement of property rights. So now you're not having a moral conversation anymore. You're having an engineering conversation. What is the best system? What is the best way of ensuring that property rights are enforced absolutely? And libertarians, anarchists have no problem conceiving of a property owner on his own property having absolute say in what happens with his property. But when you take that property owner and instead of giving him an acre, you give him a city, and all of the people who live in that city he's the landlord for all the people in that city, and he owns the whole city. Suddenly now it's like, oh, no, absolute power is bad. So absolute power is good at a small scale, but not at a large scale. I can understand where they're coming from, because obviously there's a much greater risk at the higher end of the scale. The more powerful someone is, the more capacity for evil they have. But by the same token, the more capacity for good they have. So if you're pursuing the optimal ideal solution, the ideal arrangement of human beings, you need to look at what works, not what seems ideal. And what works, what always naturally happens, is power. Sovereignty is conserved. It always restricts itself back as close as it can get to one person. And so for that reason, he's saying this is inevitable. It's inevitable that human beings will get to that point. That's the way that's hardwired into people. And in fact, it's a good thing, because in a democratic and a decentralized solution, lots of people are responsible. And if lots of people are responsible, no one is responsible. With a single hierarchical structure, with a single absolute power at the top, that person is responsible. And we're very familiar with this arrangement. Basically, every single thing that you use came to you from a monarchy. A corporation with a CEO is effectively a monarchy. It's like everything that happens in the world happens through monarchies, except for government. Mm-hmm. And libertarians have no problem. Like, if anything, libertarians err on the side of being too sympathetic to corporations. Mm-hmm. So they embedded in their psyche, whether they realize it or not, is an affection for monarchy, because they say, well, corporations, fine, it's private, it's the public, it's the government that we have to be concerned about. I say that totalitarian, like that negative totalitarianism or abusive totalitarianism from anybody is bad, whether they're a private company or a public organization or a public government. So once you get out of the realm of the shoulds and the ideals and all of that, and you start saying, let's just treat this like an engineering problem. Let's look at human beings as if they're ants in an ant colony or bees in a beehive. Let's take our moral lenses off and just look at what works. It just so happens that human beings naturally accumulate their power and give it to individual people. H.L. Mencken said the average man does not want to be free. He just wants to be safe. When you go out offering people freedom and liberty, what they hear as freedom is someone protecting me from other people, someone protecting me from the consequences of my actions, someone protecting me and looking out for my interests. You're trying to make a utilitarian case to them by saying, well, you're the one who is best equipped to look out for your interests. You shouldn't let someone else do it. And they're like, no, I'm not. I'm terrible at looking out for my own interests. I don't want to take responsibility for my actions. I just want to give it away to someone else and let them take care of me. You're never going to resist this impulse. This is why, and I know anarchists are tired of hearing this, but when you get into so-called Ancapistan, the vast majority of your neighbors are just going to do the exact same thing they're doing now. They're going to give all of their power to an individual person who promises to protect them and look out for them. And if you think that live and let live that you're going to survive in that environment, you're deluded. If you think that that's going to get you from now to that environment, you've completely lost the plot. It's never going to happen.
I got to tell you guys about a great sponsor of the Counterflow podcast, and that is Paloma Verde over at palomaverdestore.com. They sell wonderful CBD products. I'm not kidding. I used their CBD. It's like a cool menthol sports cream. I put it on my lower back the other day because I had some back pains. The stuff works unbelievably. Right then and there, I was so glad that these guys are sponsors of the show. I had to make this commercial, a new one for these guys, just to rant and rave about that sports cream. It's unbelievable. They've got CBD gummies, CBD pet products, of course. Of course, they've got the CBD tinctures. some soft gels, some salve. I've also used the melatonin CBD soft gels, and they're quite good as well. Nothing's quite like that sports cream to me. Nothing. It's just unbelievable. I almost wanted my back to hurt again so I could use it some more. Carlos and Vanessa out of San Antonio, Texas, this is their store. It's a small business. They're willing to sponsor a show like this. They want to give you guys a discount. So when you use promo code BUCK, B-U-C-K, you'll get 25% off of your order if it's over $75. And if it's your first order, sign up for their email list. That's an extra 10% off, combined to a total of 35% off. These guys are wonderful people out of San Antonio, Texas. Support them. It supports this show as well. PalomaVerdeStore.com, promo code BUCK, B-U-C-K, at checkout. And I'm telling you, get that sports cream. You will not be sorry. Let's get back to the show.
Do you think that 2020 and the lockdowns are kind of an example of people wanting safety and security, and the establishment, the cathedral, whatever we want to call them, kind of playing on that fear and that nature within people? Because and I got to give my barber credit if he's listening to this. He said something brilliant to me today. We are now Texas, no more mask mandates, 100% free, open, everything as of today. And he said, watch, people are going to fight this harder than they fought being locked down with masks. And it hit me kind of like, you know what? I think you're right. And so I think somewhere within that mindset of someone who would fight this all of a sudden more than they fought the, hey, stay on your couch for a year, because it's that they crave safety, they crave a leader, and they crave someone telling them what to do.
Yes. They want to feel like they're doing something great. Going back to work and punching a clock, getting back to your miserable life, that doesn't make you feel like you're doing something great. Staying at home, wearing a mask every time you go out, you're protecting your family and friends. You're protecting your neighbors. You're contributing to a cause that's bigger than you. It's a cause that's steeped in morality. These people are participating in a religion. Yes. They're pursuing a religious God, and their adherence to this religion, because this religion promises them utopia. It promises them everything. Do these specific steps every day, participate in these rituals, and you'll achieve all of your wildest dreams. And the people who are telling them this are offering them, how much money have they printed in the last year?
Right.
They have the world at their fingertips. They can do whatever they want. They can offer them anything. They can offer them the moon. So there's when people make decisions. I was this last weekend. I sat through Jason Stapleton's the host of Wealth, Power, and Influence. I sat through his influential communication and branding workshop, and within the political circles, there's people tend to be very contemptuous of marketing and branding, and they see it as completely separate from their world. And you couldn't be, there's a lot of people who want you to think that's the case because they'll get to keep using the same tricks on you. When you start understanding marketing and branding and you apply it to the political sphere, you suddenly recognize the way that power works in America, the way that power works in general. Marketing is just the practice of accumulating power to yourself. And so as I was sitting there, I was listening to all of this and realizing just how deeply this applies in this situation. These people have the best marketing pitch of all time. Stay at home, watch Netflix, order fast food to be delivered to your house, and you'll receive adulation as if you're like a saint for doing a wonderful, great thing. These are people who've never experienced any sort of hardship in their life. They have to manufacture hardship for themselves because they live such cushy, privileged lives. When you come up to them with the message of, actually, you should go back to work and you shouldn't get bailout checks, you shouldn't get anything. You should have to work for everything that you have. That's what true freedom is. That's where true liberty is. That's where you'll be most fulfilled. It doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It matters that it's a terrible marketing pitch. It doesn't get through to anybody. So when in the branding workshop where I was listening to it, Jason was talking about the way that humans make decisions, and humans don't evaluate risk symmetrically. They have an asymmetric evaluation of risk, where humans are much more interested in limiting downside than they are in obtaining upside. Mm-hmm. In our last episode that we did on Kingpilled on my show, Steven said at his gym, they have a thing there where guys will give their trainer $5,000. And then they have to meet a certain goal, like a certain weight achievement by a certain time, or they lose that $5,000. That's much more compelling than if you reach that by that point, you'll win $5,000, because people are much more interested in avoiding risk than they are in obtaining gain. This means that if you're willing to sustain risk, if you're willing to take risks, there's a disproportionate asymmetrical reward for you, because there's fewer people that are taking risks than there are that are trying not to take risks. So when you bring to someone your libertarian message, you ask them to join your libertarian party, to vote libertarian, to oppose lockdowns, to do any of these liberty-oriented things. What you're telling people is, you could have this great reward, but you have to take this massive risk, because you're, number one, you're opening yourself up to risk. You're taking away your own safety net. The libertarian message is a negative message. It says your ideas suck, get rid of them. But it doesn't bring anything new to the table. It doesn't fill someone's needs. It just tells them that the thing that they're filling their needs with is bad. And that's never going to be compelling. It's a horrific call to action. The libertarian political message is a failure out of the gates. It will never make moves within popular society because it doesn't offer anybody anything. And there's people out there who can print literally as much money as they want, who are offering them the world. You're never going to compete with that when you're just offering people principles.
You and I have had offline discussions, and I've heard you speak about the great podcaster Dave Smith and his move to kind of make the Libertarian Party libertarian again. And it gets, I do know this, my audience, they communicate with me through various means, and there's a lot of debate over this topic, and it gets contentious. And while even if you disagree with Dave Smith, most of us respect him and like him. And then there's the other side. What do I do? There's all kinds of paths to go down here. I'd like your thoughts on this push within, let's say, popular anarcho-capitalist circles to take back the Libertarian Party. What does that mean at all? And is it worth it in any way?
Let me start off by saying that I have a tremendous amount of respect for Dave. I think that he has accomplished some amazing things, and I think he's still going to accomplish amazing things. I think he's a fantastic communicator. I think he's a great podcaster. I think he's a really funny comedian. I've got a tremendous amount of respect for him. And it's been great watching over the last couple of years as he's evolved a little bit in his thinking. He resisted it for a while, but he started opening himself up to some new ideas, as some of these ideas of the cathedral and some of Moldbug's ideas, and there's the running joke about how he's a Christian conservative and stuff, because he kind of sort of had a come to Jesus moment with the birth of his daughter, which I can relate to, having, my son's five months old as of today. And fatherhood is if you're not a father, you don't understand it. But if you are, you understand just what a life-changing experience it is. So I have a lot of sympathy for Dave's position, and I have a lot of respect for him. I have a lot of strong feelings about what he's doing, but I don't really have a clear prescription for him. And so I hesitate to be too vocal in my criticism when I don't have, I'm just criticizing libertarians for saying your thing sucks, but not bringing anything new to the table. Yeah. So if I'm going to say your thing sucks, I want to make sure I'm bringing something new to the table myself. I think that there's a lot to be gained from what Dave is doing, from a marketing and branding perspective. I also think that there's a lot to lose. There's a tremendous amount to lose. And I think that if he's going to do what he's doing, he needs to not be starry-eyed about it. I think he needs to be realistic and he needs to be very strategic in what he's doing. And from what I've heard him say, the things I've heard him say about what he's doing and why he's doing it, I'm afraid that he's headed for a really disappointing outcome. And it's because if I didn't care about him, if I just, thought that he was just some wanker, then, I probably wouldn't say anything. I just wouldn't give him any consideration like I treat the rest of the LP. But it's because I have a lot of respect for him, and because I see what greatness he has the potential for, I feel compelled to say something. I think that the future, I said this several months ago on our show on Wealth, Power, and Influence. I said the future of the liberty movement is not in politics. The future of the liberty movement is in business, education, and entertainment, because politics is downstream from those things. The government is downstream from those things. And Dave has been a wild success in a venue that's effectively the three of those things put together. His podcast is a business. He has to run it like a business. And he's in the business of entertaining and educating people. That's where he's made a serious difference. And I think that's where he can continue to make a serious difference. I think that if he was to use this take over the Libertarian Party thing explicitly as a branding move, to acknowledge up front that they're not going to accomplish anything. Like, the only reason I'm doing this is just so more people hear who I am and come listen to my podcast. Mm-hmm. That would be very compelling. That he would be very successful with that. He would get a lot of eyeballs on him that way. And what he's best suited for is getting more people listening to Part of the Problem. Ultimately, part of the problem is just entertainment for ANCAPs. But that's fine. ANCAPs need entertainment too. And someone who's in the business of listening to podcasts like that is someone who is open to having their mind changed. And that starts with being impacted or influenced by his celebrity. When he positions himself as a celebrity, when he looks cool, when he has some reason for people to be like, hey, that guy's interesting, I want to hear more from him, they go listen to his podcast. Those are people who are open to having their minds changed. Mm-hmm. So if he uses this take over the LP thing as a way of just basically kind of creating a funnel to his podcast, I think he can have a lot of success with that. And I think that would be great. The other thing that I think could be very good with the LP is, I think if Mises Caucus people become the most influential voices within the LP, I think that they have the opportunity to work for real change at the grassroots level. Mm-hmm. That's where you can really make a difference in politics right now, is within the state, is by working at the state and local levels. That's where, if you get on your local school board, or you get elected to governor even, or just being able to be a county commissioner, or those local positions can have a really sheriff of those be the best position to get a bunch of libertarians in, because a sheriff, sheriffs can arrest federal agents. Like, if you get a good sheriff in position, he can completely change his state. But that's where the libertarian political activity can be focused if they want to accomplish something. That's not the whole game. You need people doing other stuff, but as long as there's people there, then they can accomplish something. But what I hear Dave talking about is, in his debate with Eric Brakey, Senator Eric Brakey on Lions of Liberty, he said that he poo-pooed the idea of state and local level activity, and said what we really need to do is we need to get a hold of the presidency and use it as a bully pulpit to really help people hear more people hear this message of liberty. And when I was listening to that, I was sitting in my car and I was banging my head on my steering wheel, because of the sheer preposterousness of that proposal. First of all, the idea that you're going to get yourself in that position in the first place is you might as well try to empty the Atlantic Ocean with a spoon. You're not ever. Donald Trump just got. You guys know what happened with Trump,
right? If
you think that the LP is going to get within shouting distance of that outcome, you have just left planet Earth. You have completely divorced yourself from reality. Now that's fine if this is obviously I know it's not attainable. I'm just shoot for the moon and you'll land among the stars, yada yada. Okay, fine, whatever. But like now you're working against yourself. Now you're not being honest about what you're doing. You're not being honest about your potential. You're not being honest about what you might actually accomplish. But even further, it's flawed on an even more fundamental level than that. And this is where libertarians get it wrong. Libertarianism is not unpopular because not enough people have heard about it. Libertarianism is unpopular because people have heard about it. People know what libertarianism is and they reject it. Because, like I said a minute ago, it doesn't offer anything to them. It doesn't bring anything to the table. It just takes stuff off the table without substituting it with anything. The reason the state exists like it does is because of market demand. Because the state is the only thing in the market that's offering the services. If you want to replace the state with something, you need to build it. The thing that's going to replace the state doesn't exist. If you think the state needs to go away, you're not going to replace it with a vacuum because of all the dynamics I just described in the first half of this conversation. If you're going to replace the state with something, you have to have something to replace it with. Then you can say, hey, look at this cool thing. Why don't you leave the state behind and come get involved in this thing? This is why I say that the liberty movement's future is in business, because replacing the state is a matter of business. It's an engineering problem. It's a technical, mechanical problem where we need to develop technologies that can replace the state. And once you've developed those technologies, you can point to them and you give people something to compare to. You don't need to, you don't need this, you don't need public schools. Look at this. Look at how you can school your children from home. Look how I've made it feasible for you. Start solving people's problems. Libertarians don't solve anyone's problems, and people who don't solve problems don't have any power or influence. If you want power and influence, you have to start solving people's problems. And it just so happens that a consequence of that is you'll accumulate wealth. And when you accumulate wealth, you can buy power. This is the nature of human society. This is the nature of the way humans organize themselves. So if you want to actually affect change, you have to be working in both of these arenas, state and local governments, and accumulating wealth, power, and influence. That's the reason for the name of the show. Accumulating wealth, power, and influence among libertarians. Libertarians need to be the people who have money and who govern the culture, who dictate what people believe. The only way that there's ever any hope of a libertarian society is if it is dictated from the top down by people with libertarian values, because that's how human societies work. They don't emerge organically, they're imposed from the top. This is why I say libertarianism demands authoritarianism. But that starts with gaining wealth, power, and influence. And you do that through business, education, and entertainment. Politics is a luxury for people who already have wealth, power, and influence. Now, Dave does. He has a meager amount that he can use, but he needs to use it intelligently. He needs to use it strategically. And this message is too late for him now. Like, someone needed to tell him this before he got pot committed on what he's doing now. Now he's all in. He's building up steam. I don't expect him to take this message seriously, but other people can. Other people can start working on this. Other people can start building. Hotep Jesus says, Hotep and build. Just start building. If you, like as Jason says, if you don't control the source of your income, if you don't get to dictate your own outcomes, you're never going to dictate anyone else's. Libertarians reject democracy and then try to play by its rules. This isn't a persuasion game. This isn't to convince enough people to become libertarians that they vote the state away. Mm-hmm. That's not going to happen. What's going to happen is eventually the state's going to collapse and something's going to replace it. And the people who replace it are going to be the people who already accumulated wealth, power, and influence and are ready with the technologies and the institutions to step in and fill that void. And that's where libertarians need to be now, is building those businesses and technologies and social networks and accumulating the resources that they need to fill the inevitable vacuum when the American empire collapses.
Wow, that was a good rant, Matthew. I want to close out here, but something that I love getting from people that I love their thinking, like I do you, is a book recommendation list. So I'd like because I know a lot of people listening are going, "Damn, this guy's good. What can I read that would help me learn more about what you've been talking about?" Or not even necessarily that, just stuff that you would say, this is a must-read book.
I'll just start going down my list here of my Audible, because I spend a lot of time with Audible. Number one, I would say the Machiavellians.
Yeah.
That is the closest thing to a cheat code for the modern political system that you're going to find. It is a absolute seminal work. And if you haven't, it's to the point where I have a hard time taking anybody serious in the political arena if they haven't read it. Unless they're leftist, because all this stuff just kind of comes intuitively to leftists because they have a nose for power.
They live it.
Yes, which is ironic, because supposedly they stand in opposition to power, but life is full of ironies and paradoxes.
Yes.
So there's that one. The Graham Hancock's books, Fingerprints of the Gods and Magicians of the Gods. That seems a little kind of oblique compared to this, but I think for you to truly understand where we've gotten now, you have to understand where we came from. And when you start studying alternate history, you realize just how much of a lie current history is. And that gives you, that informs the way that you understand power, because the power is the ability to influence what other people think. And history is just an accumulation of what people think happened in the past. So if the power to dictate history is true power. Yes. So if you study alternate history and realize how far divergent our current historical record that we're taught is from that, then it's an informative way of understanding power.
And just to speak on that point, this should make sense to everyone listening. Just think of how we see fake news, we'll call it, and the way things are reported, and the way things how we know they really are in that comparison. Imagine what the history books will say about 2020. So that should tell you plenty.
Absolutely. That was a big red pill for me. There's a fantastic tweet from Amused Chimp. He said, if the news is fake, imagine history.
Yes.
That when I realized as I was watching in real time as these completely asinine narratives were being developed and popularized, and the vast majority of people were believing them about COVID, that's when I realized, okay, well, this can't be the first time that this has happened. How many other things that I believe are just complete horseshit? You know, once you realize that, and you start breaking down the edifices in your mind that build up this Western democratic view of the world that we've all been steeped in, you really have to start tearing all of that down before anything else can be rebuilt in its place. So those two books. The last one I would recommend would be, let me find it here, The Brothers by Stephen Kinzer, and it's about the Dulles brothers, Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles, who were John Foster Dulles was the Secretary of State under Eisenhower, while Allen Dulles was the CIA director. So you had the Department of State and the CIA both governed by pairs of brothers, and the entire American foreign policy was dictated by guys who were a phone call apart. So by two guys who were a phone call apart. When you study that will give you an idea of the extent of the indoctrination and just deep-seated corruption that populates the American state now. It'll give you an appreciation for just how what's the guy's name? The guy who tilts at windmills. How quixotic it is to think that you're going to take on the American empire on its face. Because here's the thing: the best way to get the worst version of the government is to attack it head on. There is nothing more brutally totalitarian than an insecure ruler. The rulers who committed genocides were the ones who weren't secure in their power. This is another reason why you want to have as much power invested in a single person who feels secure in that as you can, because that's the most stable form of society. So by that's one of the downsides of this approach here by the Mises Caucus, is they're just getting themselves on the radar of the people who have the power to crush them and destroy them. There's just such a completely asymmetric risk reward proposition here that just it's not even close. If the Mises Caucus starts accomplishing anything, it will become the Proud Boys. It will be the new version of the Proud Boys. This whole domestic terrorist routine will be practiced on them. It's already been refined, and it's just going to be used on them. The last thing I would recommend people read is Unqualified Reservations. It's a blog, and it's like the most prolific blog that you'll ever see. And Moldbug he's a very lengthy writer, but he's very, very good. He's very similar to Rothbard in his scholarship and his wit and the way he writes. So anything Unqualified Reservations is good.
Yes, I second that as well. All right, Matthew. Oh, you know what? Before I get you out of here, Matt Erickson, Twitter presence, everything where the people listening can find you.
Twitter is at Real Kingpilled, RealKingpilled. YouTube is Kingpilled for now. Before long, we'll be on iTunes and Stitcher and wherever else. But for now, just on YouTube, Kingpilled, all one word. And then you can also find me on Wealth, Power, and Influence, which is on YouTube and Facebook and just about and iTunes, anywhere you listen to a podcast. That's the show that I co-host with Jason Stapleton. We go live every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 10 Pacific. And then Kingpilled, we stream live to YouTube every Monday and Thursday at 12:30 Pacific.
Busy man, all that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Matt, thanks so much, man. This has been it's like therapeutic for me. I needed this. So appreciate you being here on Counterflow.
Yes, it's been fun. Thanks for having me, man.
All right.
What did you think of that chat? I cannot wait to get some feedback. And one of the ways you can give us feedback is the Telegram group. And if you've got that app, Telegram, go and find us, Counterflow with Buck Johnson. That's our chat group, our room, whatever you want to call it. And you can let Matt know firsthand what you thought about it, because he is in that group with us. You can find me at Buck Rebel, BuckRebel on Twitter. And I got to keep pimping this out. The YouTube page is up and going. I will put video of the podcast that you just heard up on the YouTube page. I'm slowly but surely getting things all tweaked and getting the look and the aesthetic of how I want things. Oddly enough, the first one I have is Matt Erickson, to where I'm kind of getting the look dialed in, and we get on the Zoom call together, and I said, well, dang, my background looks kind of like yours. They're all going to think I'm ripping you off. Well, maybe I am. So check that out on the YouTube page. Just search Counterflow with Buck Johnson. Of course, you can go to death2tyrantspodcast.com. It's the old name, but it's the completely rebranded webpage. You will find all of our stuff on there. We are working on getting that address changed. And I think that's all I got for you guys. I hope you got something from this conversation. Lots to digest, lots to think about. And until next time, you guys have an excellent week. Share this show around.